Hello, and welcome to everyone for this exciting webinar on women mediators in peaceful protest movements. My name is Véronique Dudouet. I'm a senior advisor at the Berghof Foundation, and it's my great pleasure and privilege to be moderating this event. We have a great lineup of speakers and panelists for this hour that we will be spending together. But we will also do our best to leave some space at the end for a Q&A session. We have deactivated the hand function and the comment box, but you will find at the bottom of your screen a Q&A box that you can use to make comments and ask questions, and I will make sure to refer to these at the end of the session. So to start us off, I will start by giving the floor to our Deputy Director, Coulter, who will open this event with a few words of introduction.
Thank you so much, Véronique. First of all, let me welcome everyone to this webinar for what, for me personally, is a very important event. In a time when we've seen that the number of successful protest movements have become fewer and fewer, due in part to de-democratization, increasing authoritarianism, and shrinking space for civil society, I feel it's more important than ever to recognize that these are important spaces of non-violent movement, particularly important spaces for women. The Berghof Foundation is a peacebuilding organization based in Berlin. We work in a number of different countries and the context. I would say I'm very proud of the work that we do on gender and on women insider mediators. I'm very excited to hear some of the research that's coming out of this, especially from Ben and Ilham that we will hear later. I also really want to extend my appreciation to the team, also led by Véronique, and also to our donors, Swiss and Canada. And I think also most importantly, to thank UN Women for their continued support. So thank you so much. And over to you, Vero.
Thank you, Chris. I'm supposed now to give the floor to Sarah Douglas from UN Women, but I'm not sure if she has joined the call yet. So maybe we will wait until she arrives, and I'll give her the floor once this is the case. Maybe the colleagues can signal when she's in the call. So meanwhile, I will continue myself. And as I mentioned already, the main purpose of this event is to share and to discuss key highlights from a series of publications that we are launching today, and that will be also posted in the chat through a link. So it's one policy brief and 2 country reports on Thailand and Iraq. And we have a third one on Venezuela, which will be out next month. These studies were produced in the context of a project, as was said, co-funded by Canada and Switzerland, that support women who play insider mediation roles within peaceful protest movements. Why did we embark on this work stream, and what did we seek to achieve with this? So I would say when we think of mediation, we probably primarily have in mind contexts of armed conflict and attempts at bringing belligerent parties to the negotiation table to facilitate a way out of violence. In our work at Berghof Foundation, we have placed a strong emphasis on the role of what we call insider mediators, who are locally embedded in a context, who emerge from within the conflict context and therefore can play bridge-building roles, facilitate dialogue from a strong position of trust and legitimacy. Now, our interest was to see how insider mediation may look like outside of an armed conflict context, in times of social upheaval and mass mobilization, led by what we call peaceful protest movements. Popular protests can be highly conflictive spaces, and they can, even when they are led by peaceful movements that are committed to nonviolence, they can easily escalate into violent clashes or even into civil war. When we think about Libya or Syria or even Ukraine in 2014. So in moments and in sites of protests or between cycles of protests, we believe that peacebuilding interventions can be helpful to prevent or to mitigate violent or escalation dynamics, to facilitate peaceful change through mediation, through dialogue facilitation between different factions of a movement, or between activists and community members, or with community or with government actors, and also with security forces. The other important element in the project is the role of women and related gender dynamics. As we know, women often play prominent leadership roles in protest movements, more so, I would say, than in political parties or in armed movements, given the informal, less hierarchical nature of those movements, meaning that they face less barriers for participation and leadership. What we wanted to find out was whether women also play less visible roles of mediation, building bridges between various sets of actors, to unify demands, to prevent divides, to protect activists, to create trusts with affected communities and institutions, and therefore to ultimately advance conflict transformation. So to better understand those dynamics, we conducted some research together with local embedded researchers, some of whom work closely with movements, who might even be activists themselves, or I would say sympathetic observers of those movements, in 3 contexts of pro-democracy protests in Iraq, in Thailand, and in Venezuela. And we were very happy to see our assumptions confirmed. We have come across amazing stories of courageous women who are indeed insider mediators. And so today we want to give you a chance to hear about those women, what factors might support or impede them when playing those roles, what challenges they face in sustaining their work and moving forward towards more formal political or negotiation spaces. We have also formulated a number of recommendations for international peace builders to better recognize, to better support, or to upscale, to leverage women activists and mediators to do their work more efficiently and with greater impact. And you can read those recommendations in the policy brief that we have just published. So let me check once more before I give the floor to the 2 researchers. I think, great, Sarah Douglas is here. So I'm now going to give you the floor, Sarah, to also tell us a few welcoming words.
Thank you so much, Véronique and colleagues. And apologies, I had joined through the participants link. We are a little bit busy here in New York, as you may have noticed, with the General Assembly ongoing. So apologies for making that mistake. Thank you so much to all the colleagues, and especially to Berghof Foundation for organizing this important event today. I'm very happy to be here and to be able to discuss the pivotal yet often under-recognized role of women as insider mediators in nonviolent protest movements. The research that we're going to hear about today offers a critical opportunity to reflect on the powerful contributions of women as mediators and how we can better support their efforts. The event comes at a particularly significant moment. Just days ago, world leaders adopted the Pact of the Future, which is a global commitment that places gender equality and women, peace, and security at the heart of international peace and security efforts. The pact reaffirms the commitments made in the Beijing Declaration and also underscores that no sustainable peace or global progress can be achieved without the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women. And yet, at the same time, less than 10% of the speakers at the 79th session of the General Assembly are women. As the UN Secretary General has emphasized many times, we know that gender equality delivers for peace, climate action, sustainable development, and so much more. But this disparity in representation is a stark reminder of the work that we still need to do to ensure that women's voices are fully represented in global decision-making. Women have always been at the forefront of peaceful protest movements, working quietly and courageously to build bridges, prevent violence, and foster dialogue. In Iraq, Thailand, and Venezuela, women have taken on critical, informal mediation roles, often behind the scenes, navigating immense socioeconomic barriers to resolve conflicts and keep their communities safe. These stories of women acting as insider mediators are invaluable And today's event highlights both their successes and the challenges they face. The preliminary data of our next SG's report on women, peace, and security shows a real lack of progress overall and backsliding on women's full, equal, and meaningful participation. Preliminary data of over 50 peace processes analyzed indicate that in 2023, women on average made up only 9.6% of negotiators, 13.7% of mediators, and 26.6% of signatories to peace agreements and ceasefire agreements. The proportion of women signatories actually drops to 1.5% if the agreements in Colombia are excluded. This marks little progress since the last decade. And none of the peace agreements in 2023 included a women's group or representative as a signatory. This disparity not only hinders progress, but also risks the long-term sustainability of peace efforts. We know that when women are involved, peace agreements are 35% more likely to last at least 15 years. The Pact of the Future echoes this necessity, calling on member states to ensure that women's participation in peace processes is financed and their contributions are recognized and supported. If we are to advance global peace and security at this very difficult moment for the world, women must be at the center of these efforts, not as an afterthought, but as equal partners in decision-making and mediation. The research presented today not only brings attention to the critical role of women in nonviolent protest movements, but also provides actionable recommendations. As we consider these recommendations, it is important that donors, governments, and peacebuilding practitioners commit to sustained and meaningful investment in women's capacities. I look forward to hearing from our esteemed panelists and engaging today in this important discussion. Together, we can ensure that women's voices are not only heard, but also lead the way in shaping a peaceful future. Thank you so much.
Sarah, thank you so much. And it's been a great privilege to conduct this project in coordination and strong collaboration with UN Women. Thank you. So I will now turn to the two researchers who have done the real work in their own context. So I will first turn to Dr. Bencharat Chua. If you don't mind, I'll call you Ben. And you are a lecturer at the Institute of Human Rights and Peace Studies at Mahidol University, and you've done extensive research on social and political movements in Thailand. So Ben, you were able to interview various women who took part in the youth-led protests in 2020 onwards, protests who were asking for institutional reforms, but also sometimes even questioning the monarchy. And this led to severe repression. So I would love to hear from you some brief insights into how you conducted the research and what you found and what you think the audience should know about the study that we are launching today.
Yeah, thank you, Véronique. I prepare a short presentation. Yeah, for this research, my colleague and I, Dr. Duangathai Buranacharan-Gate, who unfortunately cannot make it today, we look at the roles of women as insider mediators in Thailand during the pro-democracy movement in 2020 to 2022. To give you a little bit of context, during those 3 years, there were rise of youth-led pro-democracy movement during the time that the country was in transition from military regime, but was still under military-led elected government. Most of the protests at that time were what we call the organic movement, in the sense that there was no clear leadership or organization. Among their claims, as Véronique explained earlier, they were claiming for democracy, but including in that, there were also attempts to get rid of military control and include the proposal to reform the monarchy and its role in Thai politics. At a certain point, the protests escalated into violent confrontation with the state. So the movement claim put the protester in confrontation not only with the state, but also with the general public who still want to work to protect the monarchy. There were also tensions between different factions within the movement in terms of what would be the best strategies or how should they respond to the state use of force and legal prosecution against them. There were debates on should they proceed with the demand for the reform of the monarchy or should they tone down their demands. But because the protests were sometimes spontaneous and did not formally organize, there was no formal dialogue space or mediation mechanism in order to ensure that there is a peaceful resolution to the movement. As a result, we have found that many individual people, or most of them are women, they work spontaneously to intervene within their own different capacities. Like some of them were protest leaders, the journalists, human rights defender, academics, or national human rights institution. We found many of these initiatives in order to find the common ground of the conflicting parties, to de-escalate the conflict, or to avoid violent confrontation. So this is the context that we do the research on the role of women insider mediator. And we found that there is a lack of understanding on the role of mediator in general, the insider mediator in particular, and their roles in conflict resolution or conflict transformation. And I think this is partly because there is limited experience of mediation in the context of protest movement in the country. So from our work, we interview the women who took part, men and women who took parts in the protest or who work with the movement. We found we could identify some roles that they play as insider mediator. I think in one of the role is that they work as the negotiator and mediator. But most of the time, the line between the two roles overlaps. Like one of these, when we ask the people that we talk to, who do you think as the mediator in the movement, they would, most of them point to this woman in this photo, who often be at the front line to negotiate with the police and in order to advance the claim of the protester, but at the same time to ensure that the police do not respond to the protester with violence. She used her skill of negotiation. So in a way, she represents the movement and be the negotiator for the movement, but at the same time, she also mediates between the two actors. We also found women who initiate dialogues among factions within the movement in order to avoid conflict between inside different groups within the movement. There are also women who initiate communication with authorities or the public in order to create better understanding of the protester. We also found some women who started or facilitate dialogue process between the protest movement and affected communities. In this photo, a group of female journalists initiated this process to have a dialogue between the protester who engage in daily confrontation, violent confrontation with the state, and the communities in that area who were affected by the violence. The dialogue session include both the closed door and open public session, and in this it was publicly televised nationwide, and the dialogues opened the space for discussion among the Thai public and better understanding of the public about the protests. Apart from individual initiative, we also found organizational role in conflict intervention, including those who work on defending the rights to assembly, for example, by create safe zone for the youth protester, or to act as observer of the movement in order to restrain the state act of violence. So these initiatives are mainly not, you may not call them mediation, but in effect, they can serve the mediation purpose. I would like to end it here with the gender dynamic of the women-female women insider mediators. I think the women attribute can serve as a nonviolent force, as this is one of the quotation from the movement leaders who often play the role of negotiator and mediator. But at the same time, although they have a lot of potential, but they are subjected to threat and harassment and violence, both by the state, by the authorities, by the public, and also even by their fellow protester. So I end it here, and then we can have further discussion later. Thank you.
Ben, thank you so much for those insights, and I'm sure the audience will have lots of questions and great interest in reading the study, which my colleague has now posted as well into the chat. So I will now turn to our second speaker, Dr. Ilham Makki. And Ilham is an Iraqi researcher, an activist, and a trainer focusing on human rights, and who also works for the Iraqi Ministry of Education. So Ilham, your study focuses on what has been called the Tishreen protest movement that started in October 2019 against mismanagement by the government, but also against the poor economic situation in Iraq. As well as in Thailand, the protests were violently repressed. So in this context, you have studied the role that women have played to mitigate violence and to build bridges among different protest factions. So I would love to hear from you as well some key trends and findings from this research.
Thank you very much. The October 2019 protests were the most significant demonstration in Iraq since 2003, because we have changed the political system or regime in 2003. They stood out because of their subtlety and the massive number of participants, with people from across central to southern Iraq joining in. Also, the majority of participants were young men between age 15 and 35. These protests were notable because for the first time in the more modern Iraqi history, a significant number of women from various age, from diverse education, socio-economic, religious, and political background were involved. The report or the research focusing on women mediation, inside mediation rules. So we look up for diverse strategy and rules that women take to prevent and manage the conflicts that happened, and to perceive the movement adherence to non-violence. So I will just talk about the man funding, what we call it, the insider mediation rules. So since the first day of the protest, the armed security forces used violence excessively, and were trying to provoke the protester to respond to them, for example, by throwing a stone or other things, in order to use this action as justification to killing them. And that happened many times. The protesters were divided into groups. One group wanted to respond to the armed security forces, and the other groups did not want to comfort the security forces. Therefore, women tried through dialogue, negotiation between the protesters who wanted to respond to the security forces and the protester who did not want to respond, to create a kind of consequences between them. And indeed, many protesters stopped comforting the security forces, and that come to reduce violence in the protest square. At the same time, the women tried to change the young protester view of the role of the unarmed police, because we have two kinds of police: armed police who shot the protester, and we have unarmed police who only they have only rules to check people who came to the protest square. As some protesters want to attack them, even though they didn't do harm to protester. And actually they are unarmed. So this increased in the end, the women succeed to prevent this attack. And increased the stability of the situation inside the protest square, and maintain the peacefulness of the protest. All the interview confirmed that women show high degree of sensitivity to conflict. So they have like the first step to how to deal with the conflict. Women played mediation role from within or inside between the protest and the local community. How? By creating conviction among protesters, for example, not to burn tires or plug the roads because these would indirectly harm people. The women succeed in sending a message to the community that these protests are peaceful, and because of that, people increasingly join the protest day after day. Another rule, there were many clashes between protesters and security forces and armed groups. So women, that of course, that lead to killing dozens of young protesters. In many situations, women were forced or try to do something to stop this killing. So they create a human chain, for example, in Baghdad and Najaf, between young protesters who were angry over the killing of their colleague and these security forces. So in all these attempts, the women succeed in preventing violence and in somehow stop killing more the young protester. The last thing, at the beginning of the protest, to the violence that was practiced against the protesting, the youth protesting, they refused to deal with or allow international and local media channels to enter the protest square to cover or to cover what happened in the protest square. Here, the women also entered in the dialogue with the youth, so they success in changing their perspective, their view about these channels. Because of that, the international and local media channels were able to cover the event and to provide an opportunity for people inside and outside Iraq to know what happened, the real happened, and the nature of the event, and even the level of the violence committed by the security forces and armed groups. This is the main funding, and I am opening to any question or any cure during the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ilham, for sharing those insights. And this leads us, the studies as well, again, in the chat for everyone to download. This leads us into the second part of this event, which is going to be our panel discussion. And for this, I will ask both Ilham and Ben to join me, but also an external guest to come into the conversation. So I'm happy to also introduce Maria Antonia Montes, if you don't mind, I'll call you Tonis, as you like it, who's a senior program officer for the Nonviolent Action Program at the US Institute of Peace, where she leads the programming on nonviolent collective action and social movements for peace. So it's great to have you, Tonis, and thank you. Yeah, you also play a great role in bringing this conversation as well into the direction of what does it all mean for peace building. And as I know that you work at the USIP in bringing together learnings and resources from nonviolent action as well as peace building through research, but also through training. So maybe I will first turn to you, Tonis, for some reactions from what you've just heard, the roles, but also some of the challenges that you've heard in the context of Iraq and Thailand. How does that resonate with your experience as a trainer? Also maybe from what you've seen in Venezuela, which is the third context that we have researched. The study on Venezuela will be out by next month. And especially maybe from the perspective of what does it all matter from a peace building perspective?
Thank you so much, Véronique, and thank you to my colleagues on the panel, and congratulations for this outstanding research, and thank you for the invitation. So I think for me, what I've been hearing this morning and by reading the research and the policy brief, the first point I think I'd make is just the importance of continuing to widen the aperture of using peace building tools in different spaces. And so I think there has been a lot of research and a lot of training to merge these two fields of nonviolent collective action and peace building, and leveraging both of those tools and those movement leaders and peace builders to support campaigns peacefully. And so this is continuing to make that connection and a stronger linkage. And I think that's really important, because we often talk about nonviolent social movements in the context of peace processes, how to leverage and pressure through social movements to elite negotiation spaces or mediation spaces with conflict belligerents or armed actors. And so now I think this research helps also to kind of flip the paradigm, looking at maybe non-violent contexts, or, you know, maybe not in civil wars or armed conflicts, but how do peaceful protest movements now use peaceful peace building strategies in their work? And so I think it's interesting to like look at both of those paradigms as complementary and mutually reinforcing. So I think that would be my first point. My second point is I think what resonates most with me, and there's a lot of research that's coming out about this as well, about the gender inclusiveness of social movements having real impacts over time, and that social movements that do include women or who are led by women can likely have more gender stipulations in political transitions or in peace processes, more likely to have democratic consolidation gains over longer periods of time, as opposed to movements that are dominated or led by men. And so there's a lot of new research that's coming out in this space. And so I think it's important to continue to emphasize the role that women play in peaceful protest movements, because there are gains and there are correlations around that. And so I think the part that is also resonating to me is, you know, this discovery. I like to use the word discovery of women who may not have realized they were playing mediation roles. And so by virtue of the conflict, by virtue of the conditions in which they live, they're kind of forced into this role of being frontline activists and peace builders. And so they're using inherent skills, they're using their bridge building, they're using interpersonal relationships to move across divides, and they discover themselves as mediators. And informally, they might not have had the training, they might not know the concepts, they might not use the words exactly as we do as kind of researchers, and yet they're doing them. They're exercising those roles. And so that discovery of being in a movement and being able to develop that sort of work, I think is a brave space and a courageous space for a lot of women who are coming into this work. And so I think in Venezuela, maybe I'll talk a little bit about what we've seen there, and particularly since the July 28th election, and this work was happening even before the election with women insider mediators, is that most recently in the last couple of weeks after the elections, women mediators within the peaceful protest movement have been shuttling across different political parties, trying to find consensus on different tactics and strategies to bring people out on the streets, or different ways to engage a broader people power movement. And so women are shuttling across different political parties. There's also been the kind of leaning into the femininity in some ways in Venezuela as well as a tactic, really relying and doing kind of like prayer vigils and emphasizing the Virgin Mary in many of those cases as well. And so like leaning into the femininity. And they also do this as a way to diffuse tension with the police who are at demonstrations. And so how do they use that as a tactic to diffuse tension? And so the third point I would make in kind of women insider mediation in Venezuela as well that we've seen is kind of the use of nonviolent communication in their movements, and really modeling that that strategy and tactic as well, which is part of mediation, part of peace building, to mediate within their movement and with their movement leadership as well. So I think there's various degrees and ways that this is happening. And so it's just really exciting to see the many different cases and the general trends that are being demonstrated across these three contexts.
Great. Thanks a lot, Tonis, for bringing those additional insights. I'd like to ask a question to Ilham and Ben. So, Tonis, you've mentioned the fact that many of those women might not necessarily realize that they are insider mediators, and these are roles that they have not been trained into, and they just spontaneously take them. So maybe in terms of the research then that you've conducted, Ilham and Ben, how did you identify those women? How, since those roles are not so visible, so what ways did you use to find those women, and how did they describe themselves as insider mediators or not? I don't know which one of you would like to take that first. Ilham?
Okay. This is really tricky. When you ask if there is any inside mediation role or mediation in general, they said no. Women, they don't have this role. Actually, this is the first answer. But so we use another technique just to describe the bias rules that are played by women in the protest, and then we discovered many of the rules that made it by the women. It's really what, as my colleague said, how we define the mediation or inside mediation. So we find an incredible data that ensure or confirm our, for example, thesis or hypothesis, sorry, that women have a crucial role in as a mediators. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that's the similar experience in Thailand, where if we use the term mediator, they would get kind of lost. They don't know what is that and what should be the role of the mediator. So at the beginning, as I mentioned earlier, that they would the protester would just point out to the negotiator, the movement representative who negotiate with the authorities. But then later we realized that we need to explain further on what do we mean by mediator and what could be the space of mediation or the realm of mediation between the state, between factions within the movement, between the movement and the public. And then through that explanation, I think they started to realize that they are playing such a role, or they are initiating or intervening into the conflict situation by introducing certain process where people of different views can talk together. And then I think through that process, they started to see themselves as mediator, but otherwise they would not call themselves mediator. Yeah.
Great, thanks a lot. And another question would be thinking about what achievements, what outcomes of those interventions, and maybe more broadly those movements have had on the broader political landscape, but also in terms of those women themselves and their own trajectories. Have they been able to sustain those roles? Have they been able to move into more formal spaces of dialogue, negotiation, or politics? So what has been your experience on that? Ben?
Yep. I think that depends on individual women, and as the key negotiator, mediator that we identify in our research now has moved from being protest leader and enter politics. She now is an MP, and she continues to work on the rights to peaceful assembly. She works on proposing the legal amendment of the Public Assembly Act, for example, and still now play another role of linking between the movement and the formal politics and electoral politics. But for other women that we interview, if they are within the organization and I think they still continue to play their role within the organization in trying to find a solution for the Thai political conflict and also to promote freedom of expression and right to assembly.
In Iraq, the most demanded by the protests, it was that changing the election law and have early elections. So when it happened, in that circle, we noticed that many women, the number of the women that candidate for this election increased. And in the end, but after the election, we have 20% of the women, they win the election without quota. So this is the first time in Iraq, and I think 4 or 5 of women who they have nothing, they have no what we call no experience, political experience, totally no they don't have a political experience, and they candidate for this election and they win without quota. So this is the indicator that really, if we give the women space, we have the chance that we can increase the women informal political sphere, for example, or in government or decision making. So yes, but then we have another situation. Maybe I can answer about it in another chance. Thank you.
No, thank you both for pointing at those achievements and those progress that were made, women being encouraged to take their place in politics. I think maybe I will ask you you three one question around recommendations, and then we will also bring some of the questions from the audience. So you have asked those women for what would be support needs that they have to either play those roles more effectively in the moments of protests or to help them sustain and leverage those roles as well. So if you would want to maybe for those in the audience who are joining us from international organizations or donor countries or INGOs such as ourselves, who can provide support through training and capacity building and other forms of support, what kind of recommendations have you heard that you found most striking and that you would want to echo? And Tonis, you of course can join into this round as well.
I could kick us off, Vero.
Sure.
So I think from the perspective of USIP, where I sit, and also looking kind of at the international community who can support these efforts, we know that training is one of the most effective tools that exists to support social movements. And so I think here training can look like different things, and it's training and education. So gender-informed capacity building, I think, is essential, where we also look at the intersectional ways in which women show up, given either constraints and limitations in the context in which they work. So training can be like strategic planning. How do you advance different campaigns? It can also look like, what is nonviolent action? What are the tools and tactics that are used in that toolbox and repertoire? And then really the skills building beyond just the concept of what is negotiation, mediation, dialogue. So really putting into practice the skills around those issues and frames. So I think training for sure. The other part is peer-to-peer exchange and learning, really being able to create spaces where women can learn from Afghanistan to Colombia to Nicaragua to Nigeria. Those are incredibly valuable. And so being able to create those spaces of exchange also helps with solidarity and movement support. And so I think that that's also key to this. And so the third piece that I would say that the international community can do is just provide, I don't know how to call it, but a wider umbrella of accompaniment. And so what I mean by that is to say that, you know, women are often caretakers in many different ways. And so like, how do you lessen the burden of that caretaking so that they can participate in these types of spaces? And also, you know, what does it mean for their bills to get paid or to be recognized for the work that they're doing? And so, or mental health and psychosocial support and resilience. So making sure that those needs are baked in, right? It's not an afterthought, and that these are the barriers that women face often to participate. And so how do we remove those effectively so that they can join movements and kind of develop these skills?
Those are great. Yes, Ben, what would you like to add?
Yeah, just add to Tony's, like capacity building and peer-to-peer learning are also the two key demands that needs that the women identify. But I like to add on in terms of capacity building. What we found, what we hear from them is not just only the like learning about nonviolent action or nonviolent communication or negotiation or mediation skill. But what they point out is they also need to be trained, or they also need someone who can be firm on their political demands, like in terms of principle, what they can give in, and but what they cannot give in order to proceed with their political demands, and how that can be played out in through different roles to avoid conflict, to promote peace, but at the same time also advance their political claim for democracy and human rights.
In Iraq, I totally agree with my colleague about the training and what kind of training that women should have. But in for example, in the Iraqi context, actually women, especially young women, they have really good skills. But the most important in Iraq, it's about the security. So we have to think how to create safety space for women to participate in public sphere. I think we have to think about the laws, the institutions, even the education, the curriculums, that what we call it the root causes for discrimination, and that to prevent women to have their human rights, like the basic human rights. So we have to consider that from up to bottom, not just to bottom from in Iraq. Actually, women really, they have good skills, and just give him that very like a small chance, and they can do anything. But we talk about security and safety space, so we have to consider that.
Thanks, Ilham. Actually, I'd like to ask you a follow-up question. You've mentioned the need for security. When we think about Iraq and the very difficult situation that women are facing, what some, maybe also you in the study, have called gender backlash that a lot of women are facing, have those women mediators been facing situations of harassment? And yeah, like would you want to maybe talk also about the challenges, and so that we don't give such a rosy picture of how femininity is used as a resource, but is also, of course, a source of risk?
Yeah, that's what I want to talk, or to focus on. If we talk just about women and their skills and training, without consider the whole situation. For example, that's what happened after, even when we write the most challenge was I faced with the research. It's when we write or conduct the report, it was during or within a massive or huge anti-gender campaign leading by the political consultative political parties who prevent all researcher or even the whole government. Do you believe that even the government now, they don't allow to use the term gender? So this is affected in direct and indirect the situation, the whole situation in Iraq, especially the women activists, the human rights, and it's shrinking the civil society space. So yeah, we have to consider all these factors and how it is affected women. It's like when we work in some aspect and we just lose many aspects. And that's what happened in Iraq, actually. So this is the main challenge we face in Iraq, how to deal with these consultative political parties, and how they now they change law, actually, and the political public sphere now, it's not, from my opinion, it's not safely enough to practice my political rights, not just to go to the work and come. No, it is about political rights, women political rights. Thank you.
Thanks, Ilham. One question to Ben and also possibly to Tonis. Ben, you mentioned at the end as well the importance of being firm on principles, and also how maybe those women mediators can help protest movements to see what is the line between what areas of compromise and non-compromise. You said that it's important to de-escalate and prevent violence, but also to advance on those claims and to promote change, because that's what protest movements are about, right? There's one question from the audience about how those women managed to navigate the tension possibly between mediating, building bridges, but also they are also activists themselves, some of them, and they want to also advance those claims. How do they navigate that relationship?
I think that's very important and a very difficult role to play. I think sometimes because they identify themselves as part of the movement, as part of the activists, I think that's the key role that they are playing, and then they keep being firm, and they keep their relationship within the movement. And I think that's how they still have their foot firm within the movement, but negotiating or mediating for the benefit of the movement. And I think that's how they can continue to get the support from the movement at large. But of course, that would mean that it can lead to some tension when they have to negotiate or to deal with the authority. From what we observe is that those who may seem aggressive by the public or by the authorities when they present their claim, but when they negotiate or when they mediate between different groups, then I think they know how to play their role with that particular position, that particular role at that moment, in order to advance their position. I think that's difficult, but the fact that they see themselves as part of the movement and still representing the movement help them to continue that role.
Right, thanks. Maybe to Tonis as well. I mean, you are used to navigating between those two worlds, as you said. So how can a single individual or woman be, and at the same time, an activist and a mediator? And do you find those roles to be compatible?
I think they are compatible. It's walking a really delicate balance in a lot of ways, but I think women are uniquely positioned to do that. I think that inherently there has to be a pragmatism of knowing that compromise doesn't always mean losing, and mediating and negotiating issues means small gains. It doesn't mean losing necessarily. And so if you look at it from a pragmatic position, and there is an understanding, a general understanding within the movement that in order to achieve goals, one must compromise, one must be pragmatic, then that you could likely get the support you need from your movement to make those types of compromises. But if we look at negotiation or mediation as all or nothing, like a zero-sum game, then I think that that's where the challenge is. And so I would just probably think about it along those more pragmatic terms. And so that could likely help women better navigate that tension.
Thanks a lot. One question from the audience relates maybe to some of what you described about those political roles that have become possible for those women through electoral change or entering parliaments, both in Thailand and in Iraq. So when women are becoming mediators and then take on those political roles, did you feel like they had to adopt, that's what the comment says, behavior similar to males in order to be heard? So did they have to become more male for their voices to be heard, or did they find any tactics to remain or to keep what one of you called this femininity and bringing into the political realm?
In Iraq, I think, for example, I think we have like one MPs. She was from she come from the protest, and now she's MPs, women MPs. I think she has the skills that now she can use it. Especially they try to change the personal code in Iraq to be like more consultative. So she lead, or she really, I can consider like example. She lead a group of women MPs, another women MPs, and try to make more pressure on another man MPs to not to change this law. So I think as I said, maybe women, they don't have like this systematic or this what we call it negotiator or a dialogue expert, but they use it like in their for example, I think all women use it in daily life, but in the political sphere, I think they use it in one way or another. We have to consider the power dynamic, and they don't have any political party or armed group to protect them, and that's what happened in Iraq, for example. Again, I'm trying to emphasize that security situation for women, even when they try to do anything, because the others who try to change, for example, law and enforce law, a new law, consultative law, they support by armed group. So this is what happened. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ilham. Maybe if I can turn to each of you, as we are coming to the end of our hour together, if there's one thing that the audience should take with them about the impact that those women inside the mediators within protest movements can make or have made, that you have found, maybe the most impressive story that you heard, what is that one thing that you would leave with them? Who would like to start?
I just imagine another scenario with the protest in Iraq without women and without all these great rules. What will happen? The protest would end, and the violence, there is no end for it. So this is my...
That's a great response. What would happen without them, right? Indeed.
My point would not be, maybe not the direct answer to Veronique's question, but more on, I think we also need to think about train not only the women, and we're expecting them to play the role of mediator, but that's something that should also be trained across different actors and different sex and gender, right? And protesters should also know and learn about nonviolent action or communication. And that's something that we need to strengthening, although we identify certain characteristics among women who can play this role better, but we need support. So that I think one of the questions from the audience is how can we make sure that they are not left alone to do all the job that we expect them to do? Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. And then last word in that last minute we have to Tonis.
High pressure. I think that I agree with my colleagues. If they're not there, then what? What happens to the movement? What happens to the gains of the movement if women are not in those spaces? And similarly to what Ben says, how do we also embed this practice and knowledge and kind of a movement mindset and a mediation mindset, not just with women, but all sectors of society, from the locally led to the elite spaces, because that's where a lot of this kind of socialization and articulation needs to happen.
Wow, thank you so much. So our time is up. I don't have even time to summarize what we've said, and I don't think that would give justice to this very rich conversation anyway. I think you have all very much shown that the role of those women is very much to de-escalate and prevent violence, but not to de-escalate conflicts. We are talking about situations where conflicts are useful and necessary to get to women's rights, to democracy, and to better societies. So yeah, I hope that's also something the audience take with them. And so yeah, I will really want to thank all of you. Also Sarah earlier with UN Women, and Chris to our leadership for the support for this project, but also, of course, our donors, Canada and Switzerland. So you have the studies in the chat. You can also download them on our website. You can continue to follow us on social media for more updates on the project, which is continuing. And I will, leave you with this. Thank you for your attention, and bye, everyone.
Thank you.